Hi guys, welcome back. I'm Ted, and I'm here to give you another lecture. And for today's lecture, we're going to cover Attila and the Huns. And now, the Huns were the most feared barbarian group that the Romans encountered. They not only struck fear in the hearts of the Romans, but they struck fear in the hearts of the other barbarian people, the Germanic tribes, that the Romans were now dealing with. And at this point, the Huns were seen as a new people outside of the norm of the barbarian archetype of the time. They were first, and they were fairly newcomers to the scene. They were only first mentioned in around the year 380 AD. And the Huns, they coalesced from smaller family clan based groups into larger tribes and confederations. And the Huns were true nomads, not the last true nomads, but the up until that point, the best example of true nomads that the Romans encountered. They rode these sturdy, shaggy horses from the steppes, fought exclusively on horseback using special bows. Um, they had this very tough social structure that promoted raids and just all around toughness, grittiness. And they were able to cover large distances very quickly. And to touch a little on that very tough social structure that they lived in, they had facial scars inflicted at birth to sort of heighten the ferocity of their appearance. You know, you would take a good look at them, a good look at the face of a Hun warrior, and simply decide that maybe battle wasn't such a good option. Okay, and many people did choose to flee rather than fight them, and they were excellent warriors. There's a tale of 300 Hunnic warriors going in and facing 1100 Visigoths, and simply just wiping out the Goths, just attacking until everyone was dead, and simply taking off all the loot and the plunder. And now the Huns, when they arrived on the scene of the boundaries of the Roman Empire, they set off one of the biggest domino effects that impacted the Roman Empire. They invaded the lands of the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths, displacing both those Germanic tribes and forcing them onto Roman provinces. Now, this led the Goths and the Romans, the Eastern Roman Empire and the Western Roman Empire, to come into separate agreements with both tribes. And these agreements basically centered on the Romans offering the Gothic tribes land in return for military service. And now, as you can imagine, these agreements broke down on both sides due to the expectation or lack of expectation from both sides. And everything came to a head when the Ostrogoths rebelled against the Eastern Empire and actually killed the Eastern Emperor at the Battle of Adrianople. Okay, and now the Huns, as I said before, they were a new people. They came from the steppes around the land of the Sea of Azov in Central Asia, and they were quite possibly the first Turkish peoples to emerge from Central Asia. And for a long time, and even now, it's a continuation on this debate amongst historians. They're thought to be the people known as the Chengnu, who threatened Han China around the same time, and both were Central Asian nomad groups. And the way the theory goes is that the Chengnu slash Huns are attempting to invade China, so the Chinese erect the Great Wall, and the Chengnu slash Huns bounce off of the Great Wall and migrate all across Central Asia and wind up at the back door of the Roman Empire. And it is true that the Chinese were setting up setting up defensive parameters to protect themselves from Turkish raiders. They hadn't had yet created the Great Wall as we know it. At this point, their defensive structures were palisades and ditches, which still were effective at keeping these horsemen out because the horse can't get up, can't the horse cannot charge up a palisade, and the horse will be mired in the muck of the ditches. But but the Great Wall, we know, wasn't put into place until the 16th and 17th centuries, and even then it failed. It was they created the Great Wall in its current form to keep the Manchus out, and it didn't really keep the Manchus out. But enough about that. Let's get to Attila. Now that we've covered the backstory of the Huns, we can sort of get into discussing Attila. And Attila, he strongly united the Huns. At this point, had I said earlier in our lecture, the Huns they had tribes or confederacies based off of united king groups, but there were many groups, many smaller groups, and Attila simply waged war against the other Hun groups to unite them. He strongly united the Hun groups into one single confederation, one single tribe, and he actually succeeded his uncle, a man named and he has many different names. Well, not many different names, but many different variants of his name. In some sources, he's referred to as Rugala, and other sources he's referred to as Rua. But it's the same man, and it was his uncle Rugala who led the first attacks on Roman provinces. And when Rugala died, he actually stipulated that Attila and his brother Bleda were supposed to share power. Now, this didn't sit quite well with Attila, and probably didn't sit well with Bleda either. So very quickly, they came to things came to head, and they both sought to replace the other, with Attila eventually displacing Bleda and ruling all by himself. And once he seized power, once he had full power, he began the metamorphosis of the Huns. And after uniting the Huns, he then turned them onto the various Germanic groups, the various Germanic tribes, subduing them and laying the foundation for the Hunnic Empire. Okay. During this point, the Huns, they weren't really in the business of attacking Roman domains for themselves. As a matter of fact, one thing about Attila's reign, or his early reign, was that it saw a sort of normalization between the Huns and the Romans, in which the Huns, who at this point under Attila were simply attacking and subduing Germanic people, and particularly the Goths. The Huns, they seem to really just like going out and beating up either the Visigoths or the Ostrogoths, whichever group they can get their hands on. They come very quickly to an agreement with the Romans, in which they sort of serve as the muscle of the Roman Empire to keep all the Germanic peoples in line. And had a side business, they keep that up. They keep that going, has Attila laying the foundations for the Hunnic Empire. Okay, and Attila, once he had subdued and beaten all the Germanic people into submission, he then began to change his he then began to change his views. He began to change his operating style. He began to attack Roman provinces, and not the Western provinces, because he was still employed as the muscle to keep the Germans in line for the West. He began to attack the Balkan provinces of the Eastern Empire, and he ravaged the lands. He ended up turning the Western Empire into, his own little private hunting grounds, his own little stomping grounds, and he just milked the Eastern Emperor out of gold. The Eastern Emperor, he simply he would attack provinces, and he would take cities. At this point, the Huns did something that the Germans apparently had not done. They had not learned. They learned how to conduct siege warfare. So it wasn't just attacking outlying communities. It was going in and capturing actual walled cities. So he would go in and attack provinces, capture cities, and simply hold them for ransom and force the Eastern Emperor to pay him off so that he can go. And he turned the Balkan provinces into its own little hunting domain, where he could conduct raids, seek plunder, captive, and rewards for his subordinates. And he also instituted, at this point, this is all Attila did in creating his own empire. He created no centralizing administrations. He didn't seek to unite the people by strong bonds. He didn't. There's no evidence to really show that he encouraged intermarriage between the people. He simply he promoted certain subject peoples. He promoted certain members to high positions within his royal court, his inner circle, but he didn't seek to intermarry cultural traditions or to really bridge any sort of gaps the way later Central Asian state builders would do, notably Temujin, the great Genghis Khan, or even the Ottoman Turks. He didn't really create any sort of cultural institutions to bind his people, but he did time those invasions well. So as I said earlier, he raided and ravaged the Balkan provinces. Well, he did this while the main Eastern army were engaged elsewhere, to sort of ensure that he'd have quick and easy conquest, and that the emperor would be forced to pay up, to pony up. Okay, and this situation continued until the death of the Eastern Emperor Theodosian. Theodosian had been happy to pay Attila to simply, leave his domains. He had been happy to sort of just simply, give him what he wanted so that he would leave. But when Theodosian died, his brother-in-law succeeded him, and his brother-in-law was a tough. He was a tough military type, a general from the Balkans, and he said, "Well, do what you want to do. We're not going to pay." And at this point, there was very little that Attila could do because the emperor, the new emperor, was perfectly willing to sacrifice the Baltic provinces and the Baltic cities, saying that they just so many times that Attila can attack before he simply exhausts the capacities of those peoples. And Attila himself, he could not gain access to the far wealthier eastern provinces of the Roman Empire. The Eastern Emperor, his traditional power and his traditional strength lay in his control of the Eastern Mediterranean cities like Antioch and Damascus, provinces like all of the many provinces in Asia Minor, Egypt. That was where the real wealth of the Eastern Emperor was located. As a matter of fact, that's where the real wealth of the Roman Empire was located. And Attila, he couldn't gain access to those territories, because in order to do so, he'd have to take the Eastern imperial capital, Constantinople, and that was simply something that Attila or any of the other Germanic groups really wouldn't be able to accomplish. They couldn't force themselves onto the city. Firstly, before you even got to the city proper or the city's main defensive structures, you had to cross a trench or a moat that was 60 feet wide and 25 feet deep. After you got across that, you came to their outer wall, which was 40 feet high. No, it was 20 feet high. Sorry about that. It was 20 feet high, and it had all these towers on it. So one, you had to, while being exposed, crossing the moat, endure fire, and get to the base of the wall, and you couldn't tunnel under it because the base was pretty high. They had actually dug a very solid base, so you couldn't tunnel under the wall. You had to storm the wall. You had to take the wall by force using ladders while being fired upon by your enemy. And if you managed to take that outer wall, and if you managed to get your horses up that outer wall, you then had to go and cover this vast and pretty just broad and open walk space. And then you came to the inner walls, and the inner walls were 40 feet high, with 60 feet towers, and in those towers they had catapults and ballistae, and ballistae were these big wheeled sort of box-looking machines that shot these giant spears, if you want to think of it like that, the giant missiles that resembled spears that would just decimate incoming enemies. So you had all these defensive structures preventing Attila from pretty much really leading any sort of assault, any sort of meaningful assault on the city of Constantinople. Um, and these structures are known as the Theodosian Wall. Theodosian, the emperor who paid off Constantinople, they were built during his reign. So really, Attila was sort of checked by the Eastern Emperor, who willingly sacrificed the Baltic provinces to the Eastern Roman Empire to preserve the city of Constantinople, to preserve whatever imperial prestige remained to the Eastern Emperor, and to preserve the richer Asian provinces of the Eastern Roman Empire. So being checked there, Attila was forced to return back home. But on his return, fortune struck him, for he received a letter from Honoria, the sister of the Western Emperor. And she was, at this point, she feared being married off to some older Roman senator. So she sent a letter to Attila asking him for help. And Attila chose to interpret this as a marriage request. So Attila goes out and raises his forces and declares that he's just been asked to be married by the sister of the Roman emperor, and that half of the Western Roman Empire should be his, has a suitable dowry for marrying the sister of the Roman emperor. And of course, the Romans were more than willing to make arrangements and come to agreement with the Huns, but no emperor. And at this point, the Western emperor is a man named Valentinian, and Valentinian nor any other emperor could ever have survived, giving away half their imperial domains to the Huns. And it's at this point that we see one of the most amazing alliances really to be formed during the Roman imperial age. You have the Romans, you have the Visigoths, and you have the Franks, along with a number of other smaller German tribes uniting in an effort to stop the Huns. And everything comes to a head at the Battle of Chalons. Now, this battle is one of the great battles of antiquity. The Huns weren't really defeated, but they were checked. The alliance held. In a tragic bit of fate, the Visigothic king, he died during the battle, but the Huns are checked. And the Visigoths, when the Huns realize that they can't win, and they're withdrawing from the campaign, the Visigoths, they want to follow up. They want to really defeat the Huns. They want to make this victory stick. But the Romans, at least the Western Romans, they're thinking long term. They quite well realize that the Huns have not been defeated, and that the Huns may attack again. But they still rather keep the Huns around and pay the Huns to keep the other Germans, the German barbarians, in line. It doesn't do them any good to destroy the Huns and be left with Visigoths, who have now this bloated, inflated ego over their self-worth. So the Romans choose not to follow up. They let Attila go back. And at this point, Attila goes back, vowing to come back again, and he does come back again. The next year, he invades Italy proper, and the Romans, they try to resurrect their alliance. And now the Franks and the Visigoths and other Germanic tribes, they refuse. They're more than willing to fight the Huns when the Huns are threatening them and their domains, but no one is going to Italy to protect the Romans. And there are no Roman field armies in Italy. So the Romans are in quite a bind. And Valentinian is not going out to fight the Huns. Two, Valentinian isn't even in the city of Rome. Attila had actually bypassed where Valentinian was at. Valentinian was in the city of Ravenna. Ravenna, early on, Rome fell from being, just a place where the imperial powers wanted to be. The only people who stayed in Rome were the Senate, and one can say that not being allowed to go with the emperor was sort of the biggest snub since Nero naming his horse as a member of the Senate. They were simply left behind while the emperor went to his new city. And the emperors had new cities. You had Constantinople in the east and Ravenna in the west. And now Valentinian, he's not leaving there. He's hoping that the mosquitoes in the swamps are enough to deter Attila from attacking where he's at. And Attila doesn't. He captures cities in North Italy, and he gets to the Po River. And at this point, everyone in Italy is panicking. Everyone in Rome is panicking. It's at this point that you have the Pope, and at this point, the popes have become perennial figures on the periphery of the Roman scene. They're still not really powerful figures, but they're simply there. They are simply there, and they're not really going anywhere. So the Pope Leo the First, along with two senators, and the names of those senators escapes me at the moment, but they go and they meet and they talk with Attila on the banks of the Po River, and it by all accounts, and this is mainly coming from Christian sources, they have a very lovely lunch on the banks of the river, and they discuss the state of affairs, and they're both saying both the senators and the Pope, they're both trying to convince Attila not to attack the city. And there are three different stories associated with this event. The first story goes, they simply bribed him. They brought as much as they could carry, and they gave it to him, and they said, "Hey, Attila, we remember we were just talking to you. We were just talking about Theodosian, and somebody brought up the house Theodosian used to give you some money. Well, I noticed that they didn't give you any money in the east, so you came to the west. Well, I just want you to know that we've got some money for you." So they bribe him. They give Attila this bribe, and he doesn't attack because of the bribe. There's a Christian tradition on it, and the story goes, Leo the Pope, the First, the Pope, goes to speak with Attila, and Attila's not having it. He's like, "I've heard you have all this good stuff in Rome. I want it. I want to give it to my friends. I want to take some Romans, some high-class Roman aristocratic ladies as concubines. Maybe if one is good enough, I'll make her a wife of mine." And he's going on and on and on about what he's going to do. And the Pope said, "You won't do it. You won't do it." And then suddenly in the sky, Saints Peter and Saints Paul appear with flaming swords, and then Attila sits, he looks up, and he says, "You know what? Maybe I shouldn't attack." And I always thought that was just an interesting one, because neither Paul or Peter really have any great military tradition attached to them while they were living, but they appear in the sky and deter Attila from attacking Rome. And the third is basically a power play. Attila sees that the emperor won't come and defend his city, and he uses the appearance of senators and the Pope to sort of jumble the political scene in the Western Empire. The emperor cannot convince it. The emperor's power and prestige is diminished, so that the Senate and the Church can rise in prestige. And those are the three stories surrounding Attila's meeting with the two senators and Leo the First. And Attila, and whatever is said, we don't really know what happened, but whatever is said, Attila decides not to attack anymore in Italy. He withdraws. He later goes and wages a minor campaign in Gaul, and then he goes back home. But on his way home, he marries this young German girl, and it's at his wedding feast, and the sources come out and say that Attila drank. He apparently wasn't a heavy drinker, but he drank. He drank to excess on this night, and something happened. Some sources say that the German girl murdered him. Some sources say that he simply burst the blood vessel and he died and choking on his own blood. But for whatever reason, he went to bed with the German girl, and the next morning, when his subordinates came in to check on him, he was dead. And the girl, whether she did anything or not, she's executed. She gets her throat cut. Um, and Attila's gone. And with the death of Attila, that was the end of the Hunnic Empire. The empire immediately splinters. His sons are fighting amongst each other for primacy. His sons are fighting amongst each other for primacy. They don't really unite. No great charismatic leader emerges to take its place, and that's the end of their story. They never again mount any significant threat to the Romans or to any other major barbarian group for that matter. Right, and that's the biography of Attila. And now, for a moment, I just like to speak on his legacy. And Attila, during during the course of analyzing historical figures, certain conquerors get they earn very specific names. And Attila, he's known as the Scourge of God. And now the same Pope who takes credit for stopping Attila, for being the great person who emerges to stem the tide of destruction of Attila, also named him the Scourge of God. And that's a pretty good title to have. Have the conqueror, to strike fear in the hearts of those whom you wish to intimidate, whom you wish to attack. It's a great psychological advantage to have, being known as the Scourge of God. All right. And now, while Attila never got a chance to marry Honoria, or even to claim part of the Western Empire as her dowry, he nevertheless succeeded in determining the political and cultural map after the breakup of the empire, at least the breakup of the Western Empire. He ensured the rise of the early Germanic kingdoms. He exposed the Roman weakness. Rome could no longer effectively deal with new barbarians. Rome could no longer effectively deal with the barbarians she had in her land. And once the Huns fell from grace, once their empire disintegrated, once they no longer became an effective policing force, a policing tool for the Western Empire, it was only a matter of time. Attila dies in the 450s. The Huns splinter immediately. It's less than a generation that the Western Empire officially simply just falls off the face of the earth. The 470s is when the pretense is finally giving up with authority in the West. Valentinian, the Roman emperor who nominally faced Attila in the West, he dies shortly after Attila, and there's no real legitimate emperor in the West, and the East doesn't send anybody to assume the imperial mantle in the West. The Germans simply take over. You have the Franks and what is now France. The Visigoths go off to Spain. The Vandals are by this time well entrenched in North Africa, around the region of that used to be the old Carthaginian, the old Punic home. They're well entrenched there. He pretty much ensured that those nations and that their cultural traditions would rise. And he was also the first of the great Central Asian nomads. You would have another a great Central Asian conqueror, Timur the Lame, better known as Tamerlane, or the Prince of Destruction, another great title. You'd have Genghis Khan. You'd have Uthman the Turk, who gave his name to the Ottoman Turks. You'd have all these great Central Asian nomadic figures who come out, who sort of barnstorm out of Central Asia to just conquer and pillage and really just establish themselves and their peoples. And Attila was the first truly great one of them. He was not the first leader, not the first person to lead a band of them out, but the first truly great one to make the civilized states tremble and to reorder the political and social structure of the lands that they went to. And there you guys have it, our lecture on the biography of Attila and a brief bit of history on the Huns. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the page, and as always, leave a comment.